Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Nostalgia Bubble podcast, the show where two lifelong best friends celebrate the movies that they love. I'm one of your hosts, Shuggie, an amateur film reviewer and nerd.
And I am Nye, a failed actor.
You're not failed. You had some success.
I played a West End lead. Can't
exactly.
Complain. Yeah. I suppose. Okay, I'm an inactive actor.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go with that.
Indefinitely inactive.
Exactly.
And the film we are doing today is Shuggie. It was your pick.
Yeah, I went with Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is one of those films that I just adored as a kid. And
yeah.
So I actually found me and one of our other friends, Will, we do a pub quiz fairly regularly. And just, I don't know why. I know, actually, I think there was a question about, like some Empire list of the best movie characters. And obviously it was a rubbish list. And I was discussing mine with Will, and I found this little scrap of paper when I was cleaning up of my top 15, and I'm like, I should just knock off some of these films for the podcast.
Oh, okay, so this is one of them.
Yeah. Henry Jones Jr. is one of my all-time favourite characters.
This is the first film that we've both had on our list, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So this was on my list as well.
Of course, it's so good.
Yeah, so my reaction when you told me in the last episode was genuine. I was very excited to watch it and talk about it.
Yeah.
And did not disappoint. I remember why I love it so much. I hadn't seen it for years, actually.
I'd seen it fairly recently.
Yeah, I've recently bought the films on DVD.
Yeah.
When you were there for that.
Your Christmas shopping where you only got stuff for yourself.
Yeah. And yeah, it was something that I was already thinking about revisiting anyway. So I'm glad I got the chance to do it, and now we can talk about it.
Yeah, so before we dive into the film, I'll run through some pre-production. I got quite a lot. I'll try and go through it quickly, and I'll, cut out some of the less interesting stuff. But this starts with a man, and that man is George Lucas.
Yes.
So he came up with the original idea just after he finished American Graffiti in 1973, which is 8 years before the film comes out. And he saw an old school movie poster that reminded him of the kind of old TV serials like Buck Rogers or old Legend of Zorro stuff. And he was sort of wishing that there would be films that captured characters like that, just classical heroes. So he came up with an idea: The Adventures of Indiana Smith.
Doesn't quite have the same ring to it.
It doesn't. The name Indiana was named after Lucas's dog.
Okay.
Which is the same dog that inspired Chewbacca, actually, in Star Wars. So that is one of the greatest dogs in movie history, despite having probably not been on film itself.
I was going to say, having just referred to myself as a failed actor, I'm already being upstaged by a dog.
Hey, this dog is clearly one of the great producers of our time. Yeah, so he came up with this idea, and as you say, the name is not as good. But so he wanted to make this, but he was trying to get the rights to adapt Flash Gordon at the time, which would later be adapted by someone else. But he couldn't quite get those rights, so he decided to make his own space opera. And it was a small film. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Star Wars.
Yeah, I saw that one coming a mile off.
I think everyone did. So he was trying to make that, and he in the end made Star Wars. So he decided to discuss his idea of Adventures of Indiana Smith with his friend Philip Kaufman, who kind of helped with shaping the character, and he added the idea of the Ark of the Covenant, because he'd been a bit of a history buff and had read, that Hitler was really into the occult. And Lucas wanted Kaufman to direct, but he was working on The Outlawed Josie Wales, which is, I know, a film that your dad loves. I remember him sticking it on once when I was around yours. And so again, this film got delayed again, because the guy that Lucas wanted couldn't do it. So then Star Wars comes out in May 1977, and Lucas is terrified of it failing. So he decides when it comes out, he's going to go on holiday to Hawaii.
Right. Running away from your problems then.
Well, it's more, it ended up not being a problem because the film was a huge success. But he didn't want in case it did fail, he didn't want to be around.
Okay, so he had a huge, successful film and a holiday.
Yeah. And
Glad.
on his holiday, he decided to invite his friend, Steven Spielberg. And they were kind of sitting around discussing, what they want to do next. And Spielberg says he wants to make a Bond film, which I think would have been really cool. And Lucas says, well, I don't have a Bond film, but I have, something similar, classical hero, but without all the kind of gadgets and all of this stuff. And Spielberg really loves it. And Spielberg says he's happy to do it. But Lucas still wanted Kaufman, and said, if Kaufman can't do it, you're in. And as it turns out, Kaufman can't. So Spielberg joins the project. Spielberg then brings on a writer called Lawrence Kasdan. Now, this guy has been a professional screenwriter for a month. He's written like one script, and Spielberg saw it and loved it. So Spielberg brings him onto the project, and the three of them, sit down and work on this for ages. Long days all in the same house. Spielberg agrees with you that the name Indiana Smith sucks.
Yes, good.
And he gets it changed to Indiana Jones.
I'm glad somebody shared my vision.
Yeah. So, whilst Lucas and Spielberg had some disagreements over the character, the one thing that they both really agreed on was that he should be fallible and, vulnerable, because that's something that would really allow the audience to relate to him. And that's something that you'll see in the first three Indiana Jones a lot, is that he gets beaten up over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, he constantly gets his ass handed to him by the bad guys.
Yeah, watching it back, because I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. Watching it back, he's much less of an indestructible hero than I remember.
Oh yeah. So they're working on it, and Kasdan kind of realizes that these two have these kind of ideas for, story beats and set pieces that they want, but he's been brought on because they need someone to really tie this all together. And so eventually they finish, and Spielberg basically says this is way too long, so they trim a bunch of the stuff, and some of those ideas end up in Temple of Doom after, but eventually they get there. And then it comes time to cast Indiana Jones, and Lucas really wants, a relatively unknown actor to play him, and they consider a ton of people. So the two kind of preferred actors from people involved with the film, so Lucas's wife at the time, Marcia Lucas, wants Tom Selleck, and the casting director wants Jeff Bridges.
Still waiting to hear Harrison Ford.
Yeah, so Jeff Bridges turns it down. Tom Selleck has just done a pilot for a show called Magnum P.I., and he's waiting to see if it gets greenlit. So if it gets greenlit, he is contracted to do it.
Which I believe it did.
Well, so the fact that Lucas and Spielberg are coming to him being like, can we, or coming to the studio being like, can we get Selleck to do our film, makes them realise that, this guy is wanted, this guy could be a star, and that's what makes them greenlight it. So Spielberg suggests Harrison Ford, and Lucas is against it, because Lucas doesn't want to keep working with the same actors. He doesn't want like a Robert De Niro to Martin Scorsese kind of person. And Spielberg has seen Empire Strikes Back and thinks this guy is going to be perfect. But Lucas also thinks that, Ford's not going to be that interested, because at this point he was really against being in Star Wars. Like, if you watch the third Star Wars film, he kind of doesn't want to be there. And that's like well-known behind the scenes stuff. Yeah.
Was that just because he was bored of it?
Yeah, I think he just wanted something fresh. But he reads the script to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and he thinks it sounds great. And so 3 weeks before filming, there still isn't Indiana Jones, and eventually he is brought on.
Great.
Yeah.
And thank God he was.
Yeah, I talked about the reason I wanted to pick this film is because he's one of my favourite characters, and without Harrison Ford, there's just no Indiana Jones.
Yeah, it's become one of those roles that you can't picture anyone else playing, which actually I find quite interesting when you put it in the context of kind of not superhero, but that sort of genre of kind of, some sort of hero.
Like those kind of classical heroes. There's been a bunch of Zorros and stuff.
Yeah, but Indiana Jones has his identity is shaped by Harrison Ford, even to the point where they dragged him back in for a fourth film,
Well,
which I'm sure we won't talk about.
No, we'll get to all of that later. I will say there is one other person I could have seen playing Indiana Jones. If sadly he hadn't passed away, River Phoenix, who obviously plays the young Indiana Jones at the start of The Last Crusade and does a wonderful job. Yeah, he captures like the kind of youthful essence of Ford's performance. Like he is a younger version incarnate, whereas Shia LaBeouf not so much.
Oh god, I'm just. Can we avoid talking about him, please?
Yeah.
First it's Transformers, and then it's Crystal Skull. I've got to say, I love this film. My favourite one is The Last Crusade.
I think it's really close between the two.
Yeah, I just for me, The Last Crusade just pips Raiders at the post, but I think because I remember more of The Last Crusade.
Okay. Here's what I'll say. I think Last Crusade may be a better film. But
okay,
Raiders is the one I saw first as a kid, and it's the one that I fell in love with as a kid. So that's why it's my favourite.
Yeah, I mean, Raiders does an incredible job of setting up a franchise. I mean, effectively, that's what it does. Because after that, obviously, came 3 more films, and it just did a brilliant job of doing that.
But without... there's too many films these days that are focused on setting up a franchise. And at no point do you feel that this is focused on that. It's telling its own story, and it wants to succeed on its own merits.
For me personally, it's unlike any other film franchise, whether it's in terms of kind of the specifics of the genre or the sort of tone of the actual film or the little kind of nuances in the film. I don't see it reflecting any other franchise I know.
That's fair. I think that's a fair comment. And I know Ford made great, went to great lengths to ensure that Indy would be seen as distinct from Han Solo.
Yeah, I can imagine if you've been in a role that iconic to kind of set yourself apart from that would. So it takes talent for sure.
Okay, well, I think we need to start diving into the film a bit more specifically, particularly the opening, because I've just got to say this might be the greatest opening scene in any film ever.
So good.
I mean, from just the beginnings. I mean, we've talked to death about the power of not showing something, and we withhold Indy and his face. We see him from behind and in profile. We don't, or in shade, but we never see him properly until he has the moment where his companion betrays him and he whips the gun out of his hand and then he turns around, and that's when we get it, and it's such a good hero shot.
It is. And do you know what I love about this is this moment really feels like a Western.
Oh yeah, and it makes such an impression of him as a character as well. There is this throwback to old school gunslingers. You think like Clint Eastwood in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I also love that we see him being really smart. He's finding all these traps, evading everything, protecting Alfred Molina
effortlessly.
And then he finds this idol and he gets out the bag of sand and he weighs it up. He realizes it's going to be a bit heavy, pours some sand out, does this swap, and there's this moment of relief. He's nailed it, and then it all goes wrong. And that's when we get, this is Indy. He is so cool, so badass, but he messes up a lot, and he gets beat down a lot, and this is
There's
a
real
perfect
clumsiness
example.
to him.
Yeah.
It's almost kind of like a descent into childishness. It's like it starts off with, you're completely right, it starts off with this really strong entrance, and you kind of think, okay, this guy is not playing around, and it's kind of like, it's an introduction that you don't see in films very often anymore, and it's classic, and and then it's a slow descent into everything literally falling down around him.
Yeah, and then they're escaping. Alfred Molina. I haven't even bothered looked up his character's name. He's just Alfred Molina. He betrays him and gets killed. Indy does the slide under the door, and everyone always thinks he reaches back and grabs his hat, but he's really grabbing the whip.
So is that just a misconception that has kind of been perpetuated by other films?
Yeah, I don't remember if he grabs a hat later, like they do a retake, but the original one is he grabs a whip, and it might just be kind of a misremembering. Like everyone misremembers the "No, I am your father" as "Luke, I'm your father" line in Star Wars, stuff like that.
One of my favourite shots in this opening kind of sequence where he's on the island is when he's running towards the plane.
Even before we get to that, he gets out of this cave and he's immediately trapped by Belloc. So we're introduced to one of the villains really early. And Belloc beats him. Belloc gets the idol and Indy loses and has to run for his life.
I really enjoy the fact that he doesn't do anything particularly heroic in this moment. He just runs.
Yeah. And he just waits for a distraction and then legs it. Yeah.
Which feels like a very sort of obviously childish thing to do.
And again, it plays into that kind of vulnerability that Lucas and Spielberg wanted, that make him relatable.
Yeah. And then obviously he's being chased, and as I said, one of my favourite moments in this whole opening sequence is when you see him running through the field with the kind of army of indigenous people behind him. And for me, there's just a brilliant moment of physical acting here where it's like watching a toddler run and his legs and arms akimbo, and it's like he doesn't have any control and he's just screaming to get the plane going. And it's just, for me, is a moment of like brilliant comedy. Yeah, I
do love the fact that the opening does portray, like, it makes you think that they've been hiking through this jungle for days, maybe weeks. But his escape plane's right there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it kind of speaks to the simplicity of everything that happens in this film, because it's not all that complicated, and he somehow he figures everything out in an instant. Like he everything is at his fingertips, And
I think there is a line later on where he just says, I'm making this all up as I go along. Well, and when he swings on the vine into the water, it's very unheroic, but this is where we get the first use of John Williams' score. And yes. I mean, we've raved about John Williams before, and I'll do it again, damn it, because this is another one of the greatest scores of all time.
Nailed it.
I mean, yeah.
Does this kind of this recurring tune, does this only play when he's swinging on something?
No, this is like his heroic character tune. And I love that the first moment we get it is this slightly unheroic moment. It's this almost heroic moment that's also just a little bit lame. It's not...
It's a bit of a letdown.
Yeah. It's a great musical cue. We learn that he is terrified of snakes, particularly Jock's pet snake Reggie who's in the plane with him. Yeah. Which is obviously very important for later on. As I said, I think this is just probably the greatest movie opening ever. I'm happy to have that debate with anyone if they want. Throw out some better ones on Twitter to us, and we'll.
I
see.
like Saving Private Ryan.
It's pretty epic.
It's harrowing and brutal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's hard to compare two completely different genres going for two completely different representations of two completely different stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I will always lean towards this just because I like this film a lot more than I like Saving Private Ryan.
Right, fair enough.
Yeah. And then we have a hard cut to Indy teaching as a professor.
Yeah.
This sort of nerdy, slightly foppish. you know,
but also
lecturer.
extremely tanned. I was surprised how tanned he was.
He's just spent a few days in the jungle.
Well, apparently he hadn't. He was just like...
You're right, actually. He spent about 20 minutes in the jungle.
10-minute run away from the plane. But, yeah, I mean, because I am so used to seeing him as Han Solo, who is not in any way sort of this kind of tall, dark and handsome fella. He's kind of this... He's pale, he's a bit of a loser.
No,
like,
he thinks he's
too
a
cool for school.
He thinks he is swashbuckling Lothario ladies man.
Yeah.
But he's actually...
But he's not.
Yeah, he always gets found out.
Which is obviously completely different to this person who is kind of inadvertently but inherently sort of... He's attractive, he's good looking, he's tall, he's tanned, he's got the brains. So it was it was really kind of cool to see such a contrast.
And there's this issue of the students flirting with him, and he's clearly a problematic figure. Okay, like there's definitely implications that he's willing to sleep with students, because I think there's implications that that's kind of Marion was younger than him and he was a TA. It was originally Lucas wanted it to go further than that, and he wanted Marion to have been 11 at the time that originally stuff happened, and Spielberg basically said no. Immediately that was like stamped out, and they said no.
Yeah,
and Spielberg said no.
Good.
Yeah. We also get to meet Marcus, who in this film there's like hints that, you know, he was once a very Indiana Jones-esque character, and I have heard it said that his character is completely betrayed in Last Crusade when they make him a bit of a joke. But he meets with Indy and says, these army intelligence guys are here and they want to see you. And this is where we get this kind of... This is an exposition scene, but this is a scene that is a masterpiece in exposition.
Yeah.
Like, it's there to give you this information drop about Ravenwood, about the Ark of the Covenant, and about, you know, the headpiece of the Staff of Ra and all of this. But what makes it interesting is that there's also this other layer going on where you can tell that these guys from the army are scared of what the Ark can do and of some kind of mystic power. Whereas you have Indy, who is very dismissive of it all.
Yeah.
And it just adds this kind of tension between belief and not that I think just makes this so much more dynamic.
Yeah, well, I guess I mean, the first time that you really see this kind of, I don't want to say magical, but sort of this...
Magical.
Almost surreal moment is when he's aligning the staff with the sunlight.
But there's also a scientific explanation there. Like, it is magnifying.
Yeah, of course. But I think that's kind of where you see the sort of blending of it, because that's something that is obviously completely scientifically explicable, but the theory and the legend behind it is completely the opposite. It's completely sort of founded in belief. And for me, that's where this becomes less of a kind of exploration mission for Indy and more about keeping it out of the hands of the Nazis for a certain reason.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, I think for me that point there is the change. That's where I kind of felt like there was a bit of a change in Indiana's kind of intentions in the film. And his kind of driving force to find the Ark.
Well, I'll get more into what I think Indy's like big character arc in the film is later on.
Yeah.
But I think that this scene does a great job in establishing just what is going on in the film.
They kind of went with less is more in the sense that, you know, they had two people who were specialists. They knew what they were talking about. They were having a debate, and it was almost just kind of laying it out on the table.
Yeah, and I think that could have been a really boring scene, but they managed to make it more dynamic by adding this almost differing ideas. Which, the fact that Temple of Doom is a prequel, and he has seen someone have their heart taken out and been fine,
Yeah.
makes Indy's complete skepticism in it all a little less believable. Don't do prequels. I mean, I think just prequels are always you find yourself
They're always
needing
dangerous.
to justify stuff a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they get brought on to keep the Ark out of Nazi hands, and this is the first time we get kind of that map effect as he's travelling.
Yes.
I love this so much.
Yeah, I mean, did they use it again in The Last Crusade, don't they?
Oh yeah, no, this is a recurring thing that gets used quite a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of feels very sort of old school, but very in the style of the way that Indy works.
Yeah, I mean, this is something for me that defines Indiana Jones. Like this,
The film itself.
No, I just like the franchise. Like this is a key element of it. This awesome map effect to show the travel.
I think it also kind of reflects him as a character. Like, so this kind of just sums up how he kind of navigates.
Yeah, and I know Ford, wanted him to be an academic first and an adventurer second. He wanted to push that idea of him being, this smart, intelligent character, and this is definitely something that plays into that. And then we go to Nepal, and we meet Marion Ravenwood. She's having a drinking competition against some guy, and she's feigning to be drunker than she is to basically scam a bunch of money out of all the people betting on it.
Yeah.
Which is something that, again, plays in later. It's, this film is a masterpiece in setup and payoff.
Yeah. I also think that it also sets up her character as a person, and it sort of really well establishes her persona.
Yeah. She's not afraid to mix it with, these big, burly blokes, and, she'll take them on at their own game. I think she beats up quite a few people throughout the film as well.
Yeah, I mean, the one issue that I did have, maybe as kind of a 21st century feminist, is that she had to be saved a lot, even as a kind of strong female character. There were elements of Bond in there, with, and maybe that was Spielberg trying to keep his Bond dreams alive, but and granted with less misogyny, but one issue I did have was that she did have to get saved quite a few times, and it felt almost like she was in captivity more than she was with Indy.
I'll give a bit of pushback on she gets saved all the time, because I think within those
Not
action
all the time, but there are
I think within those
times...
action sequences though, where she does get saved at points, she is giving as good as she gets. She takes out a bunch of people. If we talk about the plane sequence, she takes out way more guys than Indy, who beats up one guy and then fights the guy who gets killed by the plane, whereas she mows down handfuls of Germans.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that is kind of almost her redemption. By that point, she's already been captured, twice?
But they are against a far superior, military force.
Yeah, that's not to say... I mean, Indy gets captured as well.
Yeah.
It's not to say that was never going to happen, but I kind of think, given the way that she was set up, I feel like that was maybe slightly undermined by the fact that Indy had to save her a good few times.
Yeah, I mean, I am playing a little bit of devil's advocate here to push back, because I do agree that there are points where she definitely gets, doesn't get to be as badass as she is set up to be. Particularly once we get into Egypt.
when they're in the tomb with the snakes, and she's kind of stumbling around with one high heel on while Indy's got a cool head, and I was a bit like, God, she's more of a badass in this.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, I feel like she was at times she was maybe sold a little short.
Yeah, no, I 100% actually agree. I was just offering an alternative view. But in this opening bar fight that we get, she does, she takes out two of the guys, and she saves Indy at one point.
Oh yeah.
You know, she gets to be badass here, and we get
I
to
think
meet.
she saves him twice actually.
Yeah,
Because she also gives him the bottle of whiskey.
you're right. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and I think there's just elements of, you see her brains here as well. I mean, more often than not, she's working with her initiative, and she, like, even something as subtle as, obviously when, Tote, when he reaches for the kind of the medallion in the fire and burns his hand, and she just, without thinking, grabs a cloth.
Yeah.
She knows what she's doing. Like, she very much, she has a thinking brain on her. You can tell that from the get-go.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And also, you mentioned him. This is our second villain of the film, Arnold Tote.
Oh god, he's slimy.
I think he's such a good villain. He is so slimy. He is so sadistic. Yeah.
He feels like a Bond villain.
Oh, yeah, no, 100%. He feels like a Bond villain.
Like, you can see the echoes of Bond in this.
Yeah,
Completely.
you definitely can. So, yeah, you get kind of three villains of the film. So you get Belloc, who is almost the counterpart to Indy. And I think Indy's... So this is where I think I'll talk about what I think Indy's character journey is. I think, actually, at the start of the film, Indy is very like Belloc. He is in it for the archaeology. Like, that's all he cares about, is being the one to make these finds, going down in history. You know, when Belloc has the whole speech about, you know, we are just, you know, when he says we're simply passing through history to him, I think Indy agrees with that. And it comes in, you know, when Marion's captured and he finds her in the tent. And he decides to leave her because if he lets her go, the Nazis will be onto them.
Yeah.
You know, he's making that decision that he, you know, being the one to find the Ark is more important than saving this person who he clearly loves.
Do you think that that point is specifically about finding the Ark, or the reason for finding the Ark? And because the intention is that he finds the Ark and keeps it away from the Nazis, right? Do you think that he's made that choice in light of the repercussions, or do you think that it's simply about the archaeology at that point?
I think at that point it's becoming greyer, but I think the whole point of it is, by the end, you know, he's willing to make that kind of sacrifice. He goes to make that kind of sacrifice play, where he says, "You can have the Ark, just give me Marion."
Yeah.
And this is where I almost think that you need two films, and this and The Last Crusade tell one big story, because still at the end, he doesn't do it. Like, he doesn't actually, you know, give up anything for Marion. Whereas at the end of The Last Crusade, he gives up the Holy Grail for his father.
Yeah. Okay, so you think the character arc spans across those two films?
I think so. So I think he's on the way in this film. You know, by the end, he is more willing to, you know, give stuff up for, you know, people, for, you know, the ones he loves, than he is at the start. But I also think you're right that there is a degree of, you know, when he's talking about it, you know, at the start, before they go on the adventure, he is talking, you know, this is the big one, this is what we've worked for, this is what we got into archaeology for, rather than we need to stop the Nazis. And I do agree, I think you're right, eventually he does come to think, you know, it's all about stopping these guys to a degree. But I'm not entirely sure where that kind of switch comes throughout this film, or where he's at that point. But yeah.
Yeah, I think what's also really interesting is that, like, obviously we've kind of touched on that sort of tug of war between the science and the belief of it. And there's kind of this, he clearly starts to understand the danger of the Ark.
Yeah, I think by that point he does believe it is, you know, the powerful object that, I think, yeah, there's certainly some of that in there, but I don't think he knows what it'll be. And you can see that at that moment where he tells her, you know, close your eyes and don't look.
Yeah.
Let's skip ahead to Egypt, and we meet... Marion comes with him, and we meet Salah, John Rhys Davies.
Yes.
A massive fan, obviously, Gimli and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Another Lord of the Rings connection, actually. The old guy who translates the staff, the headpiece, his assistant, is played by a guy called Kieran, who was Elijah Wood's stunt double in the Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
yeah,
interesting. That's a nice little bit of trivia there.
Yeah, no, I thought I recognised him, and I looked it up, and I was like, yeah, this is the same guy.
Did you recognise him because you knew about the film, or did you recognise him from the back of his head?
I know too much about the Lord of the Rings behind the scenes. I'm the sad weirdo who can quote the cast audio commentary of the extended versions.
I feel like our Lord of the Rings episode, because there inevitably will be one or three, is literally going to be pre and post production stuff.
They're going to be specials at some point, I think. Okay, so I love Salah. Salah is one of the best characters in the film, and I'm so glad he comes back in Last Crusade as well.
It was great to give him an ally, give Indy an ally that after his kind of first mission, the opening sequence, I was always kind of wondering whether he was going to turn or not.
And you get the moment where they make you think he has, but it's actually he's been captured.
Yeah, but there just seemed to be this constant sort of bubbly friendliness to him, which kind of made you feel slightly uncomfortable because you weren't entirely sure which direction he was going in.
Yeah.
But he's a fantastic character, and I love the way he kind of facilitates Indy through the journey. And yeah, obviously, as you said, he makes a return. He's definitely earned his spot in Last Crusade.
Listen, for me, there's 2 good Indiana Jones films, and all of them have Salah in them, and the ones without aren't so great.
Okay, so you think that's the linchpin between Indiana Jones and quality?
Listen, I'm not saying correlation does not equal causation, but
it's heavily implied.
Hey, I'm just stating facts. He's in the good ones, he's not in the bad ones. Yeah, he also has my favourite line when Indy's about to eat the poisoned dates, and he grabs it out of the air and just says, "Bad dates."
Yeah, I forgot that whole scene.
Oh, really?
And then, it was just kind of really nice for it to kind of come flooding back as it happened. I really enjoy that when I watch old films. Speaking of favourite lines, I think my favourite line of the film, which is one that has kind of always stuck with me, is when Belloc tells him to sit down before he falls down. Yeah.
There's a great bit. So before he meets up with Salah to translate the headpiece, the big fight, there's a one great moment where the crowd kind of parts on Indy, and the guy's whipping the sword around, and Indy just pulls out his gun and shoots him.
Yeah.
And
then just walks off nonchalantly.
So really famously, I think there was meant to be a sword fight here, but Harrison Ford was like feeling ill that day, and they go, "What if he just shoots the guy?" And it's perfect. It's so funny.
It's brilliant. It kind of brings play to the chaos, which is exactly what Indiana Jones is, I feel like.
Yeah.
Even in the middle of like a crisis, he always has time to sort of make light of it, make a joke of it. And I feel like that's just kind of, in this sequence, that just sort of encaptures the essence of that.
Yeah, 100%. And in this scene we talk about with the bad dates, we learn that the Germans have some kind of headpiece, and they've got it from the burn mark on Tote's hand. But this means they only have one side of the headpiece, and the back side tells them that they need to take back one measurement, whatever the measurement is, to honour the god. And this means they're digging in the wrong place. And again, I love the kind of... John Rhys Davies just has a great delivery. Like, he just has a great voice. On Lord of the Rings, he's the one who voices Treebid as well, because he just has a great voice. They're digging in the wrong place. He's fantastic.
Thespian through and through.
Oh yeah, no, he's a classic thespian as well. And so we get to the map room again. There's more amazing music. I have lots of notes of just incredible music, and I just
I think that's a given with John Williams, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, what's the point in even pointing these
You
out?
don't even need to mention it
Yeah.
anymore. Like, you just go, John Williams, we know.
Yeah, it's John Williams. He's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
We also meet the kind of the third major villain, which is Colonel Dietrich, who's very much just the classic Nazi.
Yeah. He almost feels like the sidekick of a Bond villain.
Yeah. And then I love... So obviously Marion has this whole scene with Belloc where she is using her incredible drinking ability to... We missed the whole part where she was captured again. Yes, she's captured.
Shock.
And she's trying to get Belloc drunk to, grab a knife and try and escape. And that's when Tote appears. And this moment where he pulls out this like menacing looking chain out of the bag. You think he's going to do something sadistic, but it's just a like fold up coat hanger.
Yeah.
It's great.
I like that those kind of moments of humour can even be conducted by the villains of this film as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like the film is kind of from the get-go has really been constructed to give way to that.
Yeah. I think they really prized humour in the films, for sure.
Yeah, which is I think it's an important way in which it sort of separates it from not so much modern superhero films. I feel like they've figured out, like if you look at things like the Avengers and stuff, you kind of, they've figured out that interjecting humour into these films is actually a great way of
I
working.
do think they do humour in a very different way. Like you look at the modern superhero film, it's very quippy. All the humour's...
it's not a slapstick.
Yeah, all the humour's kind of these jokes. Whereas Indiana Jones, it's like different kinds of jokes. Obviously the shooting of the guy is, as you say, it's not quite slapstick, but it is physical comedy, and it plays on expectations and then subverting them a lot.
Yeah, you get elements of that in films kind of like Zorro. There were slight elements of that. But I think with this they kind of really played it up, and they kind of made sure that was, I feel like, more in the bones of the film than in a film like Zorro.
Yeah. And then Indy and Salah get to the Well of Souls, which is the location of the Ark of the Covenant. And I love when they get it open and the floor appears to be moving. Oh, we get that because there's another, just one of like the iconic lines is, Indy's snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? And then Salah's like, very dangerous. You go first. Again, it's that kind of almost it's a subversion of expectation. He's been the one almost in charge in Cairo. He's been leading the way, and this is the time like, no, on you go. As soon as it's dangerous. Yeah. So they get the Ark out, and this is where I think kind of there's a first moment of being, this is really, there is some power to this when they get it out. It feels like a weighty moment. Again, John Williams' score. It adds such power to this scene.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of feels like the big reveal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I like the comedy with the whole kind of snakes on the floor thing is a really nice sort of part of it, running parallel to the reveal itself, and that sort of, it almost undermines it in a kind of charming way.
Yeah, for sure. I think also Indy's complete terror at the snakes, which Harrison Ford is incredible in that scene where he's like falls on the floor. As someone who has a massive fear of spiders, I completely believe that he is terrified of those snakes.
Yeah, I mean, I can't pretend that if I were face to face with a cobra that was standing upright, I wouldn't be crapping myself. I was genuinely, it kind of made me squirm a little bit.
But the way he plays it is very much, I can relate to that, like in terms of the fear. His performance in that moment is so good. And I think his fear at this, again, adds to that relatability that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite often when you look at superhero films, especially when they seem to have two kind of contrasting personalities, whether it's sort of Clark Kent and Superman or whether it's Bruce Wayne and Batman, what you find is that the human identity is pretty much kind of unshakable. They're in themselves, they're kind of a very sturdy, fearless person, and that's almost what drives them towards being this superhero. And so when you see this very human, very scared person trying to be the hero here, I think that it's just refreshing to see, even though it was done before the Superman and the Batman that we know.
Yeah, I mean,
we kind of grew up
this
watching.
did come out after like the first Superman film.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously, we kind of grew up.
Yeah,
with...
I know. Yeah, I think it just goes kind of against the hero stereotype anyway to be that vulnerable. And you can absolutely see why Lucas and Spielberg always push for that.
Yeah, and especially when you can see it's a vulnerability and it's a fear of things that people are rationally and or irrationally scared of. You know, like people are genuinely afraid of snakes.
Yeah.
And so when you put in this relatable detail that contributes to building a three-dimensional character, then yeah, it just gives Indy more context.
Exactly. I did a top 10 fears in the UK for a Halloween quiz, and snakes was around the middle point of that top 10, I think.
Yeah. So it has the outreach.
And then they are very unlucky that they just happen to get caught because Belloc, Tote and Dietrich are kind of coming out of the tent from, I assume, torturing Marion a little and not getting any information. And they just happen to see them, at this place where they haven't been digging. And they get caught and Marion gets thrown into the well. And she does this great moment where she is literally climbing on Indy to avoid the snakes. Great physical acting from Karen Allen there.
I really enjoyed that moment just for the contrast of physical comedy there. Like there was like the fear, which like Indy's fear was very much fear and nothing else, whereas hers kind of created this lighter moment.
And it comes right after the moment of she's like, "Get your hands off me," sees the snakes and then is like climbing him to get away from them. And then Indy, his big brain, archaeological brain, he sees snakes coming in from somewhere where there's some air, smashes a statue through a wall. They escape from the pyramid, and they see that the Germans are planning to fly the Ark out on a plane. So they have to go and stop the plane. This big, bald German pilot mechanic guy that Indy fights just beats him half to death. Like, he properly loses this fight.
This guy looks like the kind of old school bodybuilders that would lift those kind of big iron barbells.
Oh, he is
wearing one of those like jumpsuits with a
spitting image,
bald moustache. Yeah,
and I love the fact Indy like tries to, distract him and be like, "Give me a minute," and then just completely fails to dent him with the surprise attack.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Marion's like trying to take out the pilot, which she successfully does, but accidentally gets herself trapped in the cockpit. Shoots a bunch of Nazis, accidentally spills some petrol or fuel everywhere, and then causes an explosion when she blows up a truck, which slowly is bringing fire towards the plane.
Yeah, so she nearly gets burnt alive for the second time.
Yeah, but I think, she's done a lot of the heavy lifting here. Indy's just been beaten up by this big bald guy. And she's taken out.
She brings the propeller towards him as well.
Yeah, so. I think she saves him. Like, he just gets her out of the cockpit. She does all the work here.
Yeah.
Eventually, they stop it, and the Germans have to adapt, and they put the Ark on a truck. There's a great hero moment with Indy chasing the truck down on a horse. But I feel like this whole sequence is kind of it's good, but it's done a lot better in Last Crusade with the whole tank sequence.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the tank sequence too clearly.
I highly recommend you rewatch Last Crusade because the tank sequence is
I'm certainly
brilliant.
But Yeah, there is one moment which stands out for me as pretty iconic in this, where he slides under the truck.
Yeah.
And it is just kind of a moment of pure heroism.
And we see that the guy who's thrown him through the window, when Indy puts him in the same situation of hanging off the front of the truck, he can't get his way out. This is his proper hero moment, I think, as well. So he gets out with the Ark. Salah arranges passage with his friend Katanga on a boat, and we get some sort of Indy Marion relationship stuff. You know, they're fully made up by this point. But the Germans chase them down on a U-boat, and Indy gets quite lucky here because he happened to be out of the room and hides. And there's a great moment where Belloc insists they take Marion and they take the Ark, and afterwards one of Katanga's men is like, "We've searched the whole boat, where is he?" And Katanga sees him sneaking onto the U-boat, and they all cheer. I love that moment. I also think it is worth mentioning, kind of in the overnight, where the Nazi insignia on the crate of the Ark is just burnt off magically. And what is like the first, I think, actual moment of magical power in the film. And then the Germans decide to stop on this island because Belloc wants to perform a Jewish ritual to see if the pieces of the Covenant are in the Ark, to make sure it's fit for purpose. I think he's just talking like the Nazis into this because he wants the chance to do this. You know, he's all about the historical of it all. He wants to be the guy who does this. And we get to the ritual, and Indy and Marion are tied to a post whilst the three main ones take part. And you kind of get this whole... It's a bit of a fake out when nothing happens. Yeah. And then suddenly...
It's like the calm before the storm.
Yeah, it's similar to the opening of the film, where Indy does the switch and nothing happens. Yeah. And then all hell breaks loose. All three of these baddies get some gory deaths. Like, these are gory.
Yeah, does Belloc just explode?
Yeah, Belloc explodes.
He burns alive and then explodes.
The other two kind of melt in very different ways. The practical effects on these are all fantastic. These go very far for what is, a film aimed at families. And these kind of like spirits or angels, or I don't know what they are. They kill all the Germans and they free Indy and Marion, who don't look at it. The whole, you gotta close your eyes. They're not, these humans aren't worthy of it, essentially. I think this is Indy's full believer at this point.
Yeah, well, I think you can't deny it, can you? Somebody who so kind of closely follows reason, you can't see that and not believe it.
Well, he can't see it. Like, that's the point. He has to, he's telling him to close his eyes. As much as I think he'd want to see this kind of momentous moment in history, he knows he has to close his eyes and tells Marion to do the same. I think, again, full believer, he believes in it, but also he is choosing not to witness this.
That's actually a really good point. I really like that. He kind of has to put all of his energy into the belief whilst looking away from everything that he ordinarily would stand for in order to just survive. Yeah, I think that's a really poignant point as well.
Oh, thank you. Normally it's me liking your points. I don't get the good ones in there too often. And then we kind of round up the film where the Ark's taken away. Obviously Indy's furious at this, and all they'll tell him is it's being looked at by top men.
Yeah, for me this is a brilliant piece of acting from Harrison Ford.
Yeah, he believes he deserves better having gone through all of this.
Yeah. And also I feel like it really reflects, even now, just kind of how the sort of politics of white middle class men work, and I felt like it was still very relevant, like we're at the moment, we're stuck in the middle of a global pandemic, and you've got people buying contracts and being put in charge of all sorts of systems and procedures, and we don't know who it is, we don't know what's going on, and it's like this very sort of self-protective explanation to everything. that's all about sort of preservation whilst also gaining from it, which I think in the context of the film is really important, because that's kind of where I feel like that's where Indy started off. It was about his entitlement in the role of the exploration, and you kind of see his opposition to that at the end.
For sure. Again, great point.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Before we wrap up, I'll run through some quick post-production on the film. I don't have too much. I probably cut a lot out, but
Cool.
So, actually, when this came out in 1981, I think kind of film studios were struggling a bit. Like, the audiences were on the decline. So they were desperate for blockbusters. So they, like 1981, there were tons of films thrown at, audiences. So Raiders comes out, it's number one. Second and third weeks, it kind of drops down. But people clearly respond because it has this longevity. It creeps back up to number one in its like fourth week. And it spends 9 weeks up there. It spends 40 weeks in the top 10 box office films. Films don't run for 40 weeks now.
Wow.
Yeah, that's nearly
crazy.
a year. It was labelled instant classic by people. It ended up with 5 Oscars. It won for best editing, production, sound editing and visual effects. It also got nominations for best picture, best cinematography, best director and best original score, which it lost to Chariots of Fire, which is pretty iconic. That that one song of Chariots of Fire that everyone knows. I don't think it's better than Raiders. Like, John Williams deserved another Oscar.
I feel like Chariots of Fire has kind of taken on a life of its own. You see it referenced so many times. I mean, we've spoken about how it was referenced in The Grinch, and that's indicative of how iconic it is.
Yeah.
I feel like there's specificity in John Williams' score, which means that you can't really apply it to...
I feel like the main theme has reached that kind of level, but all the other music in the film maybe not as much. But I think every piece of music in this film is just stunning. Like, as I say, I have like 4 or 5 notes in this film just going, this music's incredible. So after this came out, the summer of 1981, it set box office records, and it was part of a big resurgence in cinema. And this film was a massive part of that. Because of this film, Harrison Ford ended up being cast in Blade Runner. I'm sure I'll pick Blade Runner at some point. I adore it.
Looking forward to it. Haven't seen it.
Oh, you've never seen Blade Runner?
No. You've never seen
Okay.
Blade Runner.
I'll have to pick Blade Runner at some point. Lawrence Kasdan, the writer, also became one of the kind of biggest, most in-demand writers in Hollywood.
Yeah.
When he finished the script for this, Lucas got him to write the script for Empire Strikes Back, but that wasn't nearly as like critically lauded at the time as this was.
Yeah.
And since then, we have had a prequel in Temple of Doom and 2 sequels in Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which you don't want mentioned. There is another sequel in the works due to come out in 2022.
Yeah, I've seen this. And have they just announced that Harrison Ford is going to return?
Yeah, he's back. That's been announced for a while. They have just announced that James Mangold is going to be writing and directing it. So he did a bunch of like old western of like 3:10 to Yuma remake. He's probably best known for doing Logan, which I think
Yes, that's the announcement that I've seen. Yeah.
So obviously that was like old man superhero one last time.
Yeah.
I can see why they did it. He also recently did Ford versus Ferrari, which was great.
If it's
So I'm really
anything like
excited.
Logan, if it's anywhere near the quality of Logan, then we're in for a good film, I think.
Yeah, I believe James Mangold can give it a good send-off.
Yeah. So this is going to be the send-off, you think?
Yeah, Harrison Ford has said, and they've said this is his goodbye to the role.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say they won't necessarily try and recast it, but obviously without Harrison Ford, we've spoken, there's no Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford.
And I don't think they can bring Shia LaBeouf in.
I mean, well, that was the whole point, is that's what they were trying to do with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, was go, here's his son to pass it on, and
it
it's
didn't
not
work.
the same. Yeah.
I think there's been quite a lot of controversy around Shia LaBeouf recently as well, so which
He's not.
which would absolutely justify not having him cast for another film. So hopefully it goes well.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it, and I believe James Mangold can deliver, but we'll see. And do you have any other final thoughts on the film?
I remember watching it as a kid, and in my head it was always a classic, and I'm so glad that I've got the chance to kind of revisit it. And I did, in all honesty, I did kind of think I wasn't going to have much to say going into this, because I just watched and enjoyed it more than analysed it. It is an absolutely brilliant film, and I mean, there's a reason why it was on my list. And I think I will always love this film.
Yeah. For me, this is one of my all-time favourite films. I loved it since I was a kid, and revisiting it later in life. As you say, you weren't expecting to be able to go so deep into it, but there is such depth to it. It's such a rich film.
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes a good film, I guess, is it offers... I'm going to say it, Shug. It offers layers.
The layers are back. And I think it's just a meeting of so many brilliant creative people. You know, George Lucas is one of the best creative people in Hollywood. He's not necessarily the world's greatest writer, but when you bring on Lawrence Kasdan, who is a great writer, when you bring on Steven Spielberg, who is potentially the greatest director ever to direct, when you get in Harrison Ford, one of the greatest actors of all time, to start, it just this perfect meeting of incredibly talented people, and they've produced an incredible film. And as I say, I think maybe Last Crusade is better, and I'm sure we'll do that at some point, because I adore that film as well. But this is the one that I saw first, and for that reason it's the one that stays more nostalgic with me.
Yeah, I like it.
And I believe it's going to be your pick for a film next week.
It is, and I was kind of looking over the films that we've done, and I feel like we haven't done an animated kids film. I know we did Nightmare Before Christmas, but I feel like that was very themed.
Yeah.
So we actually haven't done an animated kids film, in inverted commas, since Shrek. So I wanted to do one that I think we've already mentioned very briefly in one of the episodes, and it's Monsters, Inc.
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting that to be the Pixar one you went with. Awesome.
Yeah, well, I've got a few of those kind of films lined up, but I was just thinking about one that I hadn't seen for a while, which I'd like to rewatch.
Yeah.
And I have some really kind of not fond memories of watching the film itself, or kind of like its place in my sort of growing up, but I just have, there are things about this film which I just absolutely love, and yeah, so Monsters, Inc. is my pick. I felt like maybe we've done a few kind of themed films in the last kind of towards the end of last season and stuff, so I thought I'd go for something that kind of contrasted with your pick this week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
No, I love Monsters, Inc. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah. I think it'll be good fun.
Have you got a closer for us this week, Nye?
I do. So at the time of recording, it is Donald J. Trump's last day in office.
Woo!
Woo! And I mean, the last 4 years has felt like a movie.
It's been crazy.
It has been mad. And yeah, I mean, I was just kind of thinking about the films that do kind of depict this sort of fall of the White House, or the kind of different ways that they depict sort of presidents and the presidency, and yeah, I was just kind of wondering, like, what have you got any particular films which sort of along those lines, the sort of presidency being put in jeopardy, or...
So the one I'd immediately, sort of more thematically towards the politics side, is Frost Nixon.
Okay, one I haven't seen.
It's brilliant, a couple of great performances in there. But I assume you're coming at it more from a action movie kind of idea.
Yeah, I mean, Olympus Has Fallen has definitely crossed my mind.
That's the other one I was thinking. So I remember there was two very similar films came out that year. Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down.
Yes, yeah.
Which are you an Olympus Has Fallen or are you a White House Down kind of guy?
I've only seen White House Down once, and I've
Mm.
seen Olympus Has Fallen more than that. I think I have Olympus Has Fallen on DVD, so I'm kind of more familiar with that one. Who's in White House Down?
It's Jamie Foxx is the president and Channing
Yeah.
Tatum's the action star, I think.
Something like that. I think,
Yeah.
so it might be time to rewatch both of them.
I don't know. I'm an Olympus Has Fallen. I'm Team Olympus Has Fallen.
Yeah,
I
think I am as well. I mean,
it wasn't good. I enjoyed London Has Fallen a lot.
yeah, I just thought it was kind of just films that have depicted presidents in interesting ways. I don't know if have you seen anything like Lincoln? That's another one I haven't seen.
I am not a fan of Lincoln. Look, I know I've just hyped up Steven Spielberg. Lincoln for me, I don't care enough about that kind of period of American history,
Yeah.
and I just found it really boring.
Wasn't there a film with Lincoln and zombies?
Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter or Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
How was that?
Terrible. I want to flip it. Best movie president.
Ooh.
Independence Day. The speech he makes is iconic. I'm going to mess up which Bill it is, but it's one of Bill, Pullman and Paxton. I think it's Pullman. And he makes,
Okay.
the whole speech of, we will not go quiet into the night. We will not surrender without a fight. We're going to live on. Today we celebrate our Independence Day.
Well, I guess that's one for me to watch as well.
Have
I
you
don't
never
know
seen
if I've got
Independence Day?
No. Yes, I have, but I can't remember.
Okay.
It. But yeah, I think cause for celebration.
Yeah.
For sure, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Google Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, and YouTube, and maybe Spotify. Who knows? I might have figured it out.
We're getting it sorted.
You can follow us at Nostalgia Bubble on Twitter and at Nostalgia Bubble Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. You can follow me at Shuggie Says on all social media platforms. And also, I just recently started streaming occasionally on Twitch at Shuggie Plays. So if you want to see some gaming over there, I streamed one of our Among Us sessions, and I'm debating streaming some Magic, stuff like that. So yeah, we'll see.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Nyrees, Nyerrees, and on Instagram at ReeseNye, so ReeSNye.
Great, and we'll see you next time for Monsters Inc. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.